The tenant in 3B. When Alex moved into the Riverside apartments, he was eager for a new beginning. The building was old but well-maintained, with a cozy, vintage charm. The rent was reasonable, and the location was perfect, just close enough to the city but far enough for some peace and quiet. Alex had no complaints, except for the neighbor in 3B. From the moment he moved in, there was something off about the apartment directly across from his. The door to 3B always seemed slightly ajar, no matter the time of day. There were no signs of life, no sound, no light, no movement. But occasionally, Alex would hear faint footsteps echoing in the hallway late at night. One evening, as Alex was coming home from work, he saw an elderly woman stepping out of 3B. She was frail, with deep-set eyes and wispy white hair. She smiled at him, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hello," she said softly. "I'm Mrs. Dawson, from 3B. I see you've moved into 3A. Alex nodded politely, though something about her made him uneasy. She seemed out of place. "Nice to meet you. How long have you lived here?" Mrs. Dawson's smile faded, and her eyes grew distant. "Oh, I've been here a long time. Too long, I think. But the building has a way of keeping you." Alex didn't know how to respond, so he forced a smile and excused himself, hurrying into his apartment. That night, as he lay in bed, he couldn't shake the strange conversation from his mind. Something about Mrs. Dawson's words stuck with him. What did she mean by, "the building keeps you"? Over the next few days, Alex noticed odd things happening in the hallway. The door to 3B would sometimes be open wide when he came home, but when he glanced back, it would be shut tight. There were times when he could hear what sounded like faint whispers coming from the apartment, but whenever he pressed his ear to the door, it was silent. One night, Alex awoke to the sound of knocking. It was slow and deliberate, coming from his front door. He glanced at the clock, 2 a.m. His heart pounded in his chest as he got out of bed and tiptoed to the door. Through the peephole, he saw Mrs. Dawson standing in the hallway, staring at his door with that same unsettling smile. "Alex," she whispered. "Won't you come out and visit?" A chill ran down his spine. He stepped back from the door, his breath shallow. The knocking resumed, this time louder and more insistent. "Alex, please. I need your help." He couldn't ignore it anymore. Summoning his courage, he unlocked the door and slowly opened it, but when he stepped into the hallway, it was empty. Mrs. Dawson was gone, and the door to 3B was wide open, revealing nothing but darkness inside. Against his better judgment, Alex approached the door and called out, "Mrs. Dawson. Are you okay?" There was no response. The air was heavy, and the hallway seemed darker than usual. He hesitated at the threshold of 3B, his instincts screaming at him to turn back. But something, a pull he couldn't explain, drew him inside. The apartment was cold and dark, with an oppressive atmosphere that made it hard to breathe. The furniture was covered in dust, and the air was thick with the smell of decay. Alex felt a shiver run through him as he stepped further inside. It was as if no one had lived there for years. Suddenly, a voice broke the silence. "Please, help me." It was Mrs. Dawson's voice, but it sounded weak, distant. Alex followed the sound, his heart racing as he moved through the apartment. The voice led him to the bedroom, where the door was slightly ajar. With a trembling hand, he pushed it open. There, lying on the bed, was Mrs. Dawson, but she wasn't the same woman he had seen in the hallway. Her body was frail and withered, her skin pale and paper-thin. She looked like she had been dead for years. Her eyes were wide open, staring blankly at the ceiling. Alex stumbled back, his stomach turning. But as he backed away, the door slammed shut, trapping him inside the room. Panic set in, and he rushed to the door, yanking at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers began again, louder this time, echoing through the apartment. "Help me, help me." Alex turned back to the bed, and to his horror, Mrs. Dawson's body was gone. The bed was empty, but the whispers continued, growing more frantic. The air around him grew colder, and he could feel someone, watching him. Suddenly, the door flew open, and Alex didn't hesitate. He bolted out of the apartment, running down the hallway and out of the building. He didn't stop until he was far from Riverside Apartments, gasping for breath as he tried to make sense of what had just happened. The next day, Alex returned to the building with a sense of dread, half expecting to see Mrs. Dawson waiting for him. But when he asked the landlord about her, the man gave him a confused look. "Mrs. Dawson," the landlord said, shaking his head. "She hasn't lived here for years. She passed away in that apartment, must be 10 years ago now. You're in 3A, right? Strange, people who live next to 3B never seem to stay long." Alex packed his things that same day and moved out. He never spoke about what happened, but he couldn't shake the feeling that Riverside Apartments wasn't just an ordinary building. Sometimes, late at night, he would still hear faint whispers, echoing in his mind. "Help me." But he never went back to find out who, or what, was asking for it.